All right, let's make a start. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very special author talk tonight. My name is Victoria. Myself and my colleague Rhiannon is on the chat to help out with any technological issues and to help give the questions to Isobelle to answer a bit later. So you can use this box, like I said, to give us any comments and hellos. We love to hear where you're coming from and what you're thinking of the talk and what you have to say, basically. So by all means, please use that chat. I would like to begin officially by acknowledging the Wiradjuri people, the traditional custodians of this land which we are hosting from tonight. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So thank you all in advance for your patience as we work out any kinks that come along with delivering talks this way. It's a new platform for us that we've had to learn very quickly. So we appreciate your patience, and any feedback that you have is always appreciated so that we can improve as we continue to do them. But first up, to actually kick off tonight's event, I would like to start by giving you a little bit of intro to our special guest author tonight, Isobelle Carmody. Isobelle is an Australian author who has written many novels and short stories for children, adults, and teenagers. She has a host of award-winning novels to her credit, and she began the first of her highly acclaimed Obernewtyn Chronicles while she was still at high school, and worked on that while completing a Bachelor of Arts and then a journalism cadetship. The series and her short stories have established her at the forefront of fantasy writing in Australia. And after living in Europe for more than a decade, Isobelle usually divides her time in Australia between her home on the Great Ocean Road in Victoria and in Brisbane. But with the onset of COVID, things have been a little bit different for you, Isobelle. Is that right?
Absolutely. For all of us.
For all of us, that's right. So welcome tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I must admit I was particularly excited for this event because I'm sure, like many of the other people who have joined tonight, I've been reading your books for many years. So thank you so much.
It's polite to say how many years.
Many years, we'll leave it at that. All right. So thank you so much once again. And look, I do have a list of questions that I would like to get through tonight, and then I want to open it up a bit later for the audience. We've got to get some of those questions in as well. So I'm going to kick straight off. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great.
Wonderful. All right. So Isobelle, one of my favorite series you have done is, of course, the Obernewtyn Chronicles. Now, like I said earlier, you started writing this series when you were quite young. Can you tell us how you came up with the story for this series?
Well, I guess like any, I always think there are three elements to any novel or story idea. Of course, I didn't know that back then when I was 14. I knew very little when I was 14. A lot of the ideas I've come up with of how writing works and how I operate as a writer really come from just looking back at my own career and seeing how it's worked. So it's sort of backwards wisdom rather than forwards wisdom. I certainly wasn't wise at 14. At 14, I started to write because I was really trying to process some stuff that had happened and some feelings that were very big and uncomfortable for me as a young woman. My father had been killed by a drunk driver, and he'd lost his eyesight some years before in a work accident. And he lost it in a car when a truck had backed into his work vehicle. So there was no blame associated, but he lost his sight, and he had a very scarred forehead, and the sight he'd lost in one eye, he hadn't lost the eye. It looked like a normal eye, except it looked like clouds were going across his eyes. I was always fascinated because I thought it was clouds somehow. So this had happened, and so he was phobic about cars and never got in one, to the extent that we were a family of 8 children with a father who rode a motorbike from that time onwards. So on the day that he was killed in a car accident, that was the first day he got into a car since losing his eyesight in that work accident. So I don't know why he got in the car. After years of being phobic, what made him get in the car on that day, I have no idea. Of course, I speculate, you wonder, there was an inquest, but nobody can ever really know. And I think you know, there are those big questions that you face probably generally about your parents and the adult world and how they operate it, that concern you, and you've got no answer. And you know that those questions gnaw at you when you're young. You have a lot of information which is sensory, which is almost non-verbal, which you've taken in from the way adults react to one another. You don't know what that is that you're taking in, but you do process it, and you do come to conclusions which may be dreamy or weird or not clear or magical, you know, ideas that you've come up with, which are actually based on real information exchange between adults that's gone over your head but clipped you on the way across. So there was a lot of that. You know, I knew of course I was 14, so I wasn't a little kid. I knew a lot, and I was the person my mum confided in. So I carried a lot of heavy adult knowledge that was really too heavy for me. When my mum went to work at night, I looked after my brothers and sisters. And so I went from rocking between an incendiary relationship with my mother to this very heavy, where I was a child and she could say you're grounded, to this very heavy responsibility of looking after my brothers and sisters. So there was this sense of power and powerlessness, that rocking back and forwards, knowledge and not knowing. And I just didn't know what to do with all that heavy thinking. I didn't have any friends. I was a weird kid, and I read a lot, and I processed some of it through my reading. You know, that book friends feeling when you find a character who's experienced or seems to have experienced some of the things you have, and you watch how they process things. But also I had nowhere to go and no one to talk to. So I took it into my writing. And so the Obernewtyn, while it is set in the, you know, the future beyond now, it does contain a lot of the philosophical ideas that troubled me when I was 14 and continue to trouble me now. So I guess that's what it was. It was my Harry Potter's room of requirement. It was the place I could go. It was a refuge. It was where I went to think about things and nobody could bother me. It was all, and I could pull the wall down and no one could get to me there. I was very good at shutting out the world once I went into my story. So that's where it really came from, a place to process things.
Yeah, okay. So I think that a lot of people might have turned to journal writing as a way to get these kind of feelings out. So what was it about actually writing this story that you think worked for you?
Well, I wrote a million. I tried diaries, but honestly, diaries were so dull. All I ever seemed to write about was what I was going to eat and who I hated at that moment. I didn't find anything to say in any meaningful way. It was all too close. That's the problem with diaries. It's all too close. And with fiction, and again, with fantasy or science fiction, you can step back from your life and you can take those big problems and big thoughts and you can think about them in a cooler, clearer way. It's a stepping back to think more clearly and to see better. And so I think Elspeth setting off on a quest, which, you know, she's a misfit, as I was a misfit. She had a nuclear holocaust in her background. Well, what is closer to a nuclear holocaust in the life of any kid but the death of a beloved parent? You know, he was my hero. He was a very flawed man, but at the same time, I adored him. I loved him, and he was gone. And I didn't know why, and he could never answer those questions that he would have been able to answer. And of course, I had a very fractured relationship with my mother. I loved her, but I hated her half of the time. There was no way I could. My mother says to me these days that she kept my diary from when I was 14, and it makes her cry. And I said to her, "Oh, Mum, God, why do you read that? You know, I was 14, I was full of angst, I hated everybody." And she said, "It makes me understand you better," which honestly, it makes her cry. Don't read it anymore. But there she is, she treasures it. But it's not for me. It was just a, I don't know, it wasn't the right vehicle for thinking in. It was the vehicle for emoting hysterically.
So it's obviously quite a personal work for you, I think you'd probably say, wouldn't you?
You mean the Obernewtyn Chronicles?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, they were, and I certainly didn't think about being published. I mean, the idea that a kid like me from the, you know, working class housing commission background where I didn't have any friends and teachers screamed at me from daylight till dark, certainly I didn't feel like a person who could write a book. I mean, back then we didn't see authors, the way you saw them, pre-COVID. You saw authors, kids see authors often and they understand the concept of writing for publication, but I didn't know that. I mean, I could have written to Tolkien, I could have written to C.S. Lewis, my heroes, but it never occurred to me. They were shining beings on another planet, who beamed down their works of art. The thought that we would exist in a world where my mail could reach them just didn't seem likely.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? And look, you have a bit of an interesting or a humorous story about how the book was actually published, don't you? To do with, a newspaper editor's desk.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I do. Well, I obviously have a larcenous and criminal streak, because this often comes up in any story. There's often some slightly over the line behaviour on my part. I wrote my book right through high school and right through journalism, and into a career as a journalist. And as a young journalist, I was given night duty. And everybody, the sub-editors were supposed to be there working, but many of them went to the pub, the huge chunks of time, which was next door, and, phoned it in basically. So there was nobody there but me. And it was very spooky in that big building all alone some of the time. We didn't have computers. We had a teleprinter where news ticked off. You read it. You either put it on a journalist's desk where you knew it would be relevant to something they were working on, or you would file it under something that you'd think up or find there. And I tore off the news that John Lennon had been shot from that little tiny thing in the middle of the night. And the rest of the time there wasn't much to do, unless everybody was sick and a story broke in the middle of the night, which it did with great excitement a couple of times. But mostly I was there alone. I was slightly creeped out. And so I used to break into the editor's office, which was locked because he had a heater under his desk. And I used to pick his office door and get inside his office, and I would sit at his really nice desk, and I would get his beautiful letterhead paper, turn it over, and use his beautiful Olivetti with a special ball that used to take mistakes off. Terribly exciting back then. No computers. And I would type my stories and, lock it all up at night. No one would know better, except one day I left a story on the desk. And the next morning when I came in, he bellowed. I mean, they really do yell, editors, like chefs and editors. It's not a myth. They yell, Isobelle, across the room. I realised instantly what I'd done, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get the sack. So I went across the room and into his office, and I thought he was just going to yell at me. And I started to try and make up some cobbled together excuse for getting in his office. And he said, this is yours. And I said, yes. And he said, do you ever think of getting these things published that you write? And I suddenly realised he'd read it. And the title of that story was The Most Awful Thing in the World. Now, he read it. This big, tough, cigar-smoking guy had read this story and thought it was good enough. And it was the first time in life it ever struck me that anybody might feel that about my writing. I didn't think of showing it to anybody. So that was how I came to, quit my job as a journalist, much to my editor's disgust, write the book one last time, and send it off to the publishers. And I was very lucky because it was accepted by the first publisher I sent it to, and that was Penguin. So I thought it was always that easy.
And how did it make you actually feel when you found out that book was going to be published at such a young age too?
Well, I think it still took a few years of writing, rewriting and editing after that. So I was in my I was in my 20s by the time it came out. I hadn't had any experience I didn't know anything about the publishing process. And so I thought, well, maybe that idea that you get rejected 1,000 times, maybe that's actually not how it works. Maybe if you work really hard, you just get published. So I wasn't as excited as I probably would have been if I had been rejected 1,000 times. I just thought, oh, so this is how it works. And that was how it worked for me. And I'm often on panels where, the other authors talk about their terrible, struggle to get published. And I just feel pathetic at the end saying, well, I know that's how mostly it happens, but not always. It's the anomalous story.
Well, I think it just adds a little bit to something of your story as a writer as well. Just that little bit of something different, I suppose.
Yeah.
And just going off track from the questions, we've got a lot of people tuning in tonight from all over Australia, Isobelle. We've got people from Bathurst, of course, Orange, O'Connell, someone from Melbourne during shutdown. Hello, Deb.
I see all your questions. I'm going to, and I see them, and we'll get to those questions. Hello to all of you, Inverleigh, O'Connell. There's probably more, but I can only see so many. Oh.
That's right, but lots of people tuning in. So welcome to all those who have tuned in a little bit later. We'll keep going. So you mentioned, Isobelle, that you know, some of your writing heroes were Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. What was it about them that you identified with or really loved?
Well, and there was like Susan Cooper, and I was very attracted to fantasy and science fiction, probably for the reasons I've already said, which is that it seemed to me that in stories about the real world, people worried about their parents splitting up, or their dad being out of work, and all of those things were important, but they seemed so mundane and so close to the world around me, so scarily close, that the last thing I wanted to do was to think about those things. I wanted to think about love that lasts forever, and dying for honour, and fighting for what I believed in. I wanted really those big things. And what I had was my mother screaming at me because the room wasn't clean, and my teachers wanting my homework. It all just seemed so drab. And then you would read about characters who were kids like me, or teenagers who would be setting off all alone on quests and facing dangers. I wanted to do that too. I wanted to go and, test my ideals out in the world. And, I was very melodramatic, and somehow it just resonated to those big philosophical questions. I mean, I think if you look at any writer's body of work, you can see that underneath there, they've got one or two questions they're answering over and over again. And that's what shows you that body of work fits together, because underneath it is the writer who has these questions. And I think all of us, not just writers, every artist, of course, but all of us human beings have questions that our lives formulate with us and for us and by us. And maybe we'll never answer those questions. Like, what am I here for? Is there good? Is it possible to be a good human being? Those were the things I was talking about. And a story about a girl having an argument with her father, to me, didn't touch on a deeper question of what is goodness? How can I be a good human being? How can I be myself, but be helpful with other people? How can I have what I want, but be part of a world too? How can I have friendship, but do what I want to at the same time? And so those questions were more able to be answered, or at least I seem to approach them more in fantasy and science fiction. Of course, there's a lot of bad fantasy in science fiction, which is very thin, like a photocopy of a photocopy, which is doing what someone has done before. Whereas you look at someone like C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, and you see original writing. They were the ones who began to write. I mean, they had a huge impact across the face of literature. And I've never been on a panel when we were asked our influences, no matter what they write, whether it was memoir, history, biography, historical fiction, hardcore gritty realism, and they all mention those guys at some point. And you just think, what is the input these people had into all of us as writers, into the world of literature? And it's huge. And I think it's, again, because it allows you to do things that other kinds of writing might not allow you to do as well, perhaps only with some subjects, but nevertheless, I think that's how it does work.
And I would agree with you there. I'm a huge reader of fantasy and science fiction, and I think for me as a reader, the pure escapism sometimes and the exploration of completely foreign ideas and things is exciting, and it really can make you think about things in depth more and think what's important, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had a teacher calling me today to ask me to do some talks in Yeppoon with some Year 11 students. And he said they're having trouble with their short stories. And he said the short stories are all about Australian identity and about, what are our ideals. And I can immediately imagine the kinds of stories that those kids would think they have to write. They'd be thinking they have to write Gumtree stories set in the bush and surfers and this kind of mythological Australian, because I'm not sure we are or even ever were exactly those kinds of characters. But I'm looking forward to dealing with those students because I think I can show them how to look at these ideals in a completely different setting that will give them a lot more adventure and excitement in exploring those ideas and free them from from the bounds of realism, which are, they're constrained.
Definitely.
Yep.
And I think, Isobelle, you have mentioned that you've completed your PhD, I believe. So is this where that kind of thinking comes into it?
Well, I wanted to, I was hoping you would give me an opportunity to tell you my big news, which I just got today. And I had always, it took me 7 years to write my PhD. And many times I thought that I certainly wasn't going to be able to do it. I wasn't, I didn't know that 70% of people who start, of the 100% of people who start, only 30% finish their PhDs. Thank God nobody told me that, because it would certainly have probably put me off altogether. But I plugged away for all these years, and I always believe you can have 3 marks. You can have, major changes, you can have minor changes, you can have no changes. And I always thought, well, I'll get major changes, that'll be fine. I'll get a chance to make it better, and it'll be, it'll be great. I'll get some guidance. So I kept all my library books here for the, for months, waiting to do the major work. And today I got my examiner's reports, and I have no changes to make, none at all. I can hardly believe it. I've been screaming. I'm slightly hoarse because I've been screaming with excitement, for some time now. So I'm actually exhausted with delight at this moment.
Congratulations.
So I really did it. I finished my PhD. I'm actually going to be able to. So if anyone needs me to operate on them, I'm ready to do it.
You are a doctor. Well, look, congratulations. That's a huge amount of work, and to be able to concentrate and focus on something for that long, it's one more thing to admire about you, I think, Isobelle.
Well, it's so nice to share it. I was really looking forward to telling it to you tonight.
Absolutely.
And to any of you who are out there doing it or contemplating it, I know you're supposed to hate your PhD at some moments. I never hated it. I loved every second of it. I loved the exploration of knowledge. I loved the novel I had to write. I just loved literally everything about it. It did go on for a very long time, and I can't believe I finished.
Definitely worth celebrating in your isolation up in sunny Queensland.
Yes, well, I'd been walking on the beach. I was house sitting someone's house up the coast, and I'd been walking on the beach, and it was cold and windy, and I thought, no, I have to have a victory swim. So and I went into, people gasped, and I ran into the cold water and swam and had my victory lap.
Oh dear, fantastic. Oh gosh, look, I've lost track of where I'm up to with my questions in celebrating your good news. I suppose what I'd like to ask next is, are there any particular children's or young adult or even adult authors that you're following closely these days, or that you find some kind of similarity to?
Well, I'm looking at lots of interesting authors. Of course, I wish I'd written down the answer. I wish I'd thought about this, because the minute you ask me, I can't think of anybody.
Of course.
I really like the guy who wrote. Now I'm just going to seem so dense. I think it's called Ghost Species. James Bradley. He's done some incredible environmental stuff. Kat Sparks has done a really interesting book dealing with climate change. So I'm really interested in that as subject matter, because of course I was dealing with, atomic bombs and computers and stuff like that. But what I was frightened about when I was writing Obernewtyn was that someone would drop the ultimate or a worse bomb. But now I think our fears are somewhere different, although, the nuclear thing is always looming in some way. But our greater fears are somewhere different now. So I'm very interested in people writing into those areas. There's a young female writer who wrote, oh no, I'm just going to sideways here, look at my phone and try and find her in a hurry.
Well, I've put you on the spot.
I like her very much. I like the work that she's been doing. you know what? I'm going to see if I can find her. Oh, I know what her name is. It's Marley Jane Ward. She's doing some really interesting dystopian stuff, some tough dystopian stuff that's really of interest to me. I like Amberlynn Quayamola. I'm pronouncing that wrong. She's an Indigenous fantasy science fiction writer. I love what she's been doing. So those are some of the writers I'm interested in whose work that I've looked at. There's a woman called Marianne de Pires whose writing I like very much too. She's done some science fiction set in Western Australia. I really love that. There's a kind of like almost a cowboy series with a woman at the ranger at the centre of it that she's written, which is science fiction. So, you know, I'm very, those are people that have just come to mind straight away. Trent Jameson, I love the fantasy he's been writing. I love his series about death. I'm very interested in those. Siri is now trying to give me information. Don't you love the way Siri just suddenly starts talking to you?
She's got all the answers. Well, great. Thank you for some of those suggestions. I've certainly heard of James Bradley and been interested in reading some of his work for a while. So another one that I'll have to pick up and add to my pile.
Karen Warren is writing some really interesting horror. I'm not much of a horror reader. She actually scares the hell out of me. And but she's a very fine writer. And the reason I've been reading that is because I'm trying to do a short story for a collection, which I don't really write horror, so I'm going to skim in by the hair of my chinny chin chin. But I'm trying to familiarise myself with what constitutes horror. You know, what's the breadth of horror? Because there are all kinds. There's psychological, there's physical, there's all sorts of horror. So I'm trying to find the niche that will work for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, genres do kind of blend together, as yours would really, from the definition between fantasy and science fiction.
Yeah.
Young adult, children, adult, like it all kind of blends together. So I've got faith in you. I think you can get to that scary horror level.
We'll see. I'm thoroughly enjoying it anyway. So I do one bit more of work today. Once I got the news, I was too busy having hysterics, leaping around like a demented cricket.
I bet. Oh goodness. All right. Well, something that I've wanted to know, Isobelle, is with the Obernewtyn series. You've spent a lot of time with these characters. For you as the author, was it hard to let go of these characters and hard to let that storyline finish?
You know, if you think about the Obernewtyn Chronicles, the truth is I haven't let them go. The only way I could end that story was knowing that I can have 1,000 back doors into it. I actually have signed up with Penguin, and this was a while ago, the Before Time Chronicles, which will tell the story of Cassandra in 3 books. And I'm also, before that, I will write the Book of Matthew, which will be a standalone big book, which will track Matthew's story where he leaves the series, and it'll allow me to look more closely at the Spit and also at the Red Land and the politics there and the world there. And it allows me to look at Dragon's story, and it allows me to go beyond Elspeth's story. And towards the end of the Obernewtyn Chronicles, I realised that in order to answer all the questions everybody want answered, I would have to turn Elspeth into just a device, and I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to stay with her story. So I decided then that some of it would be seen sideways. So you see the business with Elspeth, with Dragon, and you see a lot of things happening sideways, just slightly up in the wings rather than front and centre, because I knew I would revisit them much more deeply later on. So there's that book, you know, and honestly, everyone seems to have read this series during the lockdown period. I just feel like all I want to do, I'd love to write the Book of Matthew, you know, I'd love that to be the next thing that I was going to write, simply because of that. I'd like to go there in lockdown too.
Yeah, and he's such a fantastic character too. Same with Dragon, like there's a lot to be told there, you're right. So very exciting that those opportunities exist. So was there a particular character in the series or really in any of your works that you really loved writing?
Well, I don't know if anyone will have read these because they're out of print now, but they will come back into print. It's the Gateway series, which is Billy Thunder and the Nightgate and the Winter Door, and the third one to be rewritten to be written is called The Firecat's Dream, and I will republish those, but I loved writing those. That was just the most sheer fun. Writing Billy Thunder and the Nightgate was the most. It's quite a dramatic book. I enjoyed that better than anything else I've ever written because I took my animals into it, and that was, something I'd never done before with anything that I'd written. And they came with the main character into a world where they were able to speak, and I was able to kind of like articulate them as characters and really expand into their personalities, Goatee and Elle and Billy Thunder and all the rest of it. So I'm really looking forward to going back to that again too, and finishing that series down the track as well. But that was great fun to write.
Good. And look, that will lead me into a question that many people have already asked in the chat. A lot of people, Isobelle, want to know when the third book in the Legends on Trilogy.
I can see how many times it's down the side. That series has it took a long time to buy that series or to get that series back off, the rights to that series back off Penguin, and to I wanted, because Penguin, when they bring it out, it's been a decade and a half since it was out, 18 years or something, and Penguin didn't want to bring out the first two books again, and I didn't want to bring a third book out in a series that could only be read by people who'd accessed the first book. So it took a long time and a lot of negotiation. I got those first two books back again, and Allen and Unwin bought them from me, and so they're waiting for me to do the third book. That will be the next thing that I do. The thing that I've got to finish before I do that is a book that's been with them. It's a full-length book that they've had for a year. I wrote that during my PhD, called Comes the Night, and that's a standalone book which will come out first with Allen and Unwin before, and then the next thing I write will be Darkbane. So I read Darkfall and Dark Song for Belinda as a way of kind of preparing myself mentally to get back into that world again. So it really is coming. I know you've been hearing that over the years quite a lot, probably from me from time to time. But yes, it's definitely coming. Like the Red Queen, which some people thought I was stalling. I didn't know how to finish. I didn't want to finish. None of the above. It just took time, and so will it. So will the Darkbane appear.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I suppose it can be pretty tough sometimes managing people's expectations as an author, as well as all the behind the scenes things that happen that readers don't recognize or realize. So what is the toughest part of being an author?
I mean, I absolutely love being an author. So I don't think you can't say anything is the toughest part, because the hard stuff is part of the process. Like, you recognise when you're struggling with ideas, like this story I've just begun now. I'd been writing for weeks trying to get into the story, and I would say I was piling up words on the doorstep of the story, hammering on the door trying to get through, and in the hope that all those words would like break the door down to the story and let me actually get to it. And eventually it did happen. But part of all that effort to get through the door and that frenzy of trying to figure out a way, you're actually processing ideas at all, at several different levels, so that when you do get through, you've got all of this material that you've churned up. So it is difficult, those initial phases, and despite however many books you write, I still feel in the end that maybe I can't do it anymore. Maybe I forgot how, maybe I never could do it and I tricked everybody. It's a typical thing people feel. And the only great thing about being published for a long time and having a lot of things out is the knowledge that I've felt this before. I know what this is. And hopefully, most of the time, so far, it's always been wrong. I did manage to do it again. I did get there. So it just gives you faith to keep going. It's keeping faith in yourself, pushing your own boundaries constantly, not ever just being satisfied, and but at the same time being able to finish things. You know, it's important to push yourself, but it's also important to be able to finish, to have that pragmatic streak that lets you say, okay, I'm going to, you know, this has to finish, rather than, you know, metamorphosing into the next thing you would have written if you had stopped and started a new book. Otherwise, you know, you might be the kind of writer who writes, you know, if you're writing Moby Dick, maybe you can write and write and write and process all that richness into one book. But I'm not, you know, I'm not writing Moby Dick, and I'm not writing, you know, I'm not Proust. So I'm a kind of writer who processes my ideas through various books. So I want to finish things.
Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that your writing inspires a lot of very hardcore fans. And I know that we have a library member who we deliver books to who is in an aged care facility, and you're the only books he reads over and over again. So between him and, you know, we have on the chat Ava, who's in the middle of reading Billy Thunder and the Nightgate. Yeah, look, we have the Gibbons family from Bathurst. They're in the middle of, or they've just finished reading Little Fur, and they wanted to know how you came up with the character. So you've got people from all different ages there who you've inspired with your writing, and they're wanting to know more. So there you go.
And Crow is protesting. He has his own little sign. He wants his own YouTube station. Yes, I deserve a YouTube station. Hello, out there, you readers. Okay, enough now. He has to go away because he's very chatty and talkative. So yes, he's here with me. Forward to have any time I pick him up, he's very happy to have a word. So I'm glad. What was the question? The family reading?
The Gibbons family. They wanted to know how you came up with the character of Little Fur.
Oh well, it was actually. I was living in Prague, and there was a 400-year flood, and that means a flood that doesn't last for 400 years, as somebody thought, but a flood that comes up that high only once in, you know, 400 years. And because it's such an old city, there are many levels below ground, and there's, you know, because the city's gone up, the ground level's actually gone up year after year. And when the flood came, all of these basements were filled with mud and slush, and many of them collapsed. So it would be like a perfect tooth on top of an abscess. So you'd have a beautiful modern building with collapsed levels underneath it. And a lot of the city was blacked out, and a lot of people had to be evacuated. But if the rule was you had to evacuate if the water touched the bottom of your building. But I was living on a street which had a hump, and my building was just above the waterline, so I stayed. We stayed. And when the water started to recede, I took my little girl, who was about 4 or 5 then, to have a look at all the strange things that had happened in the flood. And as we walked through the city, I showed her, look, there's the metro underground where the steps go down and water's lapping up on the steps. And look, it's all full of water. And I took her to the park to show her where the park was, where we'd walked, was full of water, and police were rowing around to stop people going in so that trees wouldn't fall over and squash them. And there was a place where the cobblestones had split open, and down there you could see like a whole house height down. You could see somebody's stove and some blue tiles where obviously the street had just been built over an old house. So I showed her all these things, and she just didn't react at all. She just, you know, was very silent and looked, and I thought, well, maybe she doesn't understand. And then as I was leading her back home, we came to a window near the bottom of right on the footpath of a building where the water had smashed in the glass, and she suddenly stopped and squatted down and looked down, and a shaft of sunlight went down, and you could see collapsed levels, and there was just rubble and a little bit of dark glimmering water down there. And she looked for a really long time, and I was really curious about what was going on in her mind. And she turned to me and she said, Mama, what lives down there? And I couldn't help myself. I said, trolls. Trolls live down there. And she said, are they bad trolls? I mean, I could see she wanted them to be bad. So I said, very, very bad trolls. And she said, she's starting to get scared now, and she says, are all the trolls bad? And I said, not all of them. One is not bad. One is a little elf troll called Little Fur. She's half elf and she's half troll. And my clever little 5-year-old daughter said, that's weird. And I thought it was, I just blithely said yes, not realising a day would come when I would have to figure out how a troll and an elf fell in love and had a baby. So I was going to have to work that out someday. So that's sort of where it came from. She asked questions about, she said, what's her name? And off the top of my head, I made up Little Fur. And we would often walk, and she would ask, did Little Fur ever have a friend? Where does Little Fur live? What does Little Fur do? And every time she asked, I would just make up a story as we were walking. And then one day we were sitting at home in the sunlit kitchen, and she was drawing, and I was drawing Little Fur for her, doing whatever I'd made her do that day. And it suddenly struck me that a day would come when she would be too old and she wouldn't want that story anymore. And I just felt so sad at the thought of letting it go and being bereft. And I thought, well, I'm a writer. I can do that. So I just, that's what I did. I started to write that story. So.
And there was born the series, the Little Fur series.
Little Fur series.
Fantastic. I'll have to pass that on to them when I see them next. Look, I might go to some of the attendee questions now, Isobelle, because we've got quite a few. We'll start with George, who sent one through right off the bat. What does Inez stand for from the Obernewtyn series?
Oh, I saw that one. Well, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's an acronym for I don't think I should tell out loud, actually, that person, because if I do and someone hasn't finished the series, that will be spoiling it terribly. I was talking to a group of little kids the other day about The Velvet City, which is my next book, which was supposed to come out last month, but will now come out next year. And I forgot that no one had read it and gave away something which was so I was very chastened by how people were upset with me for doing that. So yes, it's an acronym that means something in particular.
So George will have to finish reading the whole series to find out.
Feel free to write to me and ask me, and we can discuss it.
Fantastic. All right, what else have we got? Lots of comments, Isobelle. As a teen, this one's from Lauren. So as a teen, I wanted to be an amazing writer like you. My question is when you'll be finishing the Legend Song trilogy. So we have answered that one. Soon.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I can put a time frame on it in a sense. If I'm finished in Comes the Night this year, I would begin writing. I will be writing the Legend Song before the end of this year. I'll be beginning that. So I would say I'll finish it next year, and then it's up to Penguin, to Allen and Unwin rather, when they bring it out, because they'll bring out, when they know that I'm getting close, they'll bring out the first 2 books with new covers, which I'm very excited about, and then on the back of that they'll bring out the final one as well. So yeah, I'm terribly excited too. I hope I hurry up and finish it.
Fantastic. A question here from Ava. When you write, how do you stop the text from losing the kick?
Well, I always feel like, I write first for myself, and that's probably the best, or at least it's certainly a good piece of advice I could give anyone out there who's writing, whether they're doing it for love and passion, or whether they're doing it for school or some other subject, for a university subject. To choose something that you feel very passionate about and really love and are really interested in, not something you know everything about, but something that, for me, to take a question into a piece of writing is the most powerful thing you can do, and explore it within the text. And as long as it's a question that's very deep for you, it's almost impossible to get bored. And if you're not bored, it's very unlikely you're going to bore your reader. I think the biggest mistake you can make as a writer is trying to write something you think is fashionable or someone else will want. It might be that your agent would suggest to you, look, stories about vampires are very popular. And so you go away and you don't feel anything much, but you know what a vampire story is. You read a bunch of vampire stories and you have something happen. And that's the kind of story that lacks any real heart or soul, because there's no real connection between you, the writer, and the story. It's a facsimile of something that somebody else did and explored. Sometimes you can start out that way and it opens up for you, but a rule of thumb is if you feel bored writing it, you are definitely going to bore your reader. So don't be bored yourself.
Good advice. And I think that may also help James out, who's got the question here. What advice you'd give to someone trying to get their work published now, and how to overcome the disheartening sense that it may never find an audience?
Well, I think if I would do it, I was just actually talking to a fellow writer about this today. If I were beginning now, I would just, if no one else published it, I would publish it myself. I would either put it online or I would produce it myself and publish it myself. People have done it, and you don't make money like huge amounts of monies that you would make being a big blockbuster for a publisher. But you know what? Most writers don't make that kind of money, and publishers put a lot of money into that. It's like a factory. And if you think about it, if you're just a modestly published writer, and the amount you get paid is actually quite small. And if you were to publish yourself and write something decent and really work putting it out there, I actually think in this day and age, you could publish it yourself. So I would write no matter what, and I would try to get it published, but I'd always try to do it, through a medium that could get it out better than I could first. I would try mainstream publishing first, but I would not be disheartened if it doesn't happen, because there's a lot of writers out there who were or would be published in a traditional way if the world were the way that it was before. And who knows, post-COVID, what it will be like, what the world will be like for writers.
Absolutely, it could be completely different.
Yeah, and I say that as hope, not as something to feel disheartened by, but everything's thrown up in the air to some extent, and it may well be that new ways of writing, new platforms for writers will arise and will actually be open to more writers too.
James also had another point to his question there, was that he's curious to know what you think it was about your writing that meant it was picked up so easily by the publisher.
I don't think by no means was I a genius. If you could see the first draft of the Obernewtyn Chronicles, the first book I donated to the Lou Rees archives on the understanding that no one can look at it till I'm dead. That's how bad it is. So it's turgid, it's melodramatic, it's thousands of adjectives. I loved writing it, and there must have been something in it. I think it was the right book at the right time, but I think the main reason is that I had written it for a lot of years, and you can't do anything that you love year after year after year without getting better. It's obvious that you would get better. So I think all those years of writing before I sent it off were probably what another writer would do, writing it twice, sending it off, getting it back, rewriting it again. So I think really I just did a lot of the work before I sent it out rather than sending it off. And I actually feel like it would be great if writers, especially new writers, would not think of publication so fast, but would focus on the thing that they're doing, because really, when you write, what you love the most is the actual act of writing. That's in the crucible of creation before anybody ever gets to see it. Everything else is great, but that's the best bit, and no one can take that away from you. You only need a pen and paper, and you can do it in a room all alone. Have that wonderful experience of, opening up a new world and thinking about the world, processing the world creatively. Nothing's more beautiful.
Nice words there. And Peggy wants to know, Isobelle, can you tell us what your actual PhD topic was?
Oh God, well, I won't give you the long academic title. It's called Writing the Slipstream, and what you do with a creative PhD, research PhD, is you do a novel, and you write, and that's the largest component of the PhD, and then you write an essay, an exegetical essay about a component of craft or some idea connected. So there's supposed to be some resonance between the two components. But what I tried to do, and it seems what I succeeded in doing, is I wanted right from the start to tangle the two forms together, academic and novel. So I wrote a novel in which I put myself as the writer, spying on my own characters, basically. So as a researcher, creeping around and researching my own characters, and it was really great fun. It's a dog's breakfast. It's really, really long. It will need serious editing before it can ever be published. And if anyone even wants it, and if not, I will publish it myself.
Yes, absolutely.
Called The Theatre of Death.
What's that?
It's called The Theatre of Death.
Theatre of Death. There you go, everyone. Look out for the Theatre of Death. Yeah, we had someone asking when the PhD novel will be published. So there you go.
It depends. It's with, like I'm required to give anything that I write to my publishers to have a look at. So it's with them, and we're waiting. I'm waiting to see. I haven't in mind a publisher. I don't actually think my publishers that I've got at the moment would be the publishers for it, because it's easier for them to publish something like something you've done before, and this is very different. So maybe nobody will want to take it on. At least I think I'll have to go to another publisher, but we'll see.
We will see. Absolutely. Are you happy with how The Red Queen ended, or what would you change?
Yes, I am happy with how it ended. In fact, I had hysterics leading up to the end of it, because there was such terrible pressure. And at one point I was saying to the editor, how could I, because I had so many letters from people saying, you better not kill this person, and you better make sure you do this, and all these kinds of things. And I just felt I didn't know how I could please that many people. And I was saying this to my editor at one point, and she said, Isobelle, you've never tried to please anybody. You for yourself. Why don't you just please yourself? And I thought, oh yeah, okay. So that's what I did. The only thing that was not as I had planned was there was one scene in which Gulfer and Marrowman appear, and a character that I had expected to die, another character would not allow that to happen. And that was, for me, that was a really beautiful moment in writing, when the character just would not let it happen. And so, those of you who've read it will know what I'm talking about, and those of you who haven't will, if you get to that book, realise what I mean when you get to it. It was very moving for me to have one character save another character from me.
Oh dear. And look, we've got a comment from Sophie tuning in from America at 3 a.m. Welcome, Sophie. She says that your work has driven her for almost a decade. How does it feel knowing that your art has touched the lives of so many people?
Well, I guess you can't, I did write it very selfishly, to survive or for myself, and sending it out into the world to publish was kind of like an experiment. I don't know what I thought I would feel like. I felt very exposed, actually. I remember having the first copy of Obernewtyn and going to a journalist friend with it under my coat saying, look, here it is published, but don't show anyone, because I suddenly realised anyone could buy me and open the book and say, what a piece of rubbish. So I felt very vulnerable, and you always feel that vulnerability when it goes out. So it's gratifying, really, and touching to find that something that comforted you and gave you solace, and the big philosophical questions that you tried to answer are things other people care about too. It made me feel that I wasn't alone in the world. It made me, certainly I don't feel like that misfit I felt like, who felt like nobody in the world felt like me, as most teenagers probably do. I just felt so lonely, and those responses just eradicate that loneliness. It would be impossible to feel that you don't mean anything in the world when you have so many people responding. But I think it comes back to, a certain honesty that you have with yourself and your piece of work. What you approach as a writer is something deep inside you. That's what you're offering. That's why you feel exposed. And so for people to respond to it, it feels like, oh, well, I succeeded. I did get that deep. I did make that work. But I don't feel satisfied ever with anything that I've written. I don't think you can think I want to be perfect when I write before I send it off, because you'd never send anything at all off ever. I think it is that pragmatic streak that thinks, okay, now it's time for this to end, and then bring it sort of to an end. So yes, and you know, on the worst days, and I have them like everybody else does, on the worst days, without fail, I'll get some response from somebody that just makes me feel, that just resonates to me, just makes me, again, feel I'm not alone in the world, you know, and that there's hope for me in that, hope for the world, in the thought that if you can reach people just by your writing, it must be possible for us to be able to figure this stuff out and actually, you know, look after the world and one another a bit better than we're sometimes doing.
And that's it, I suppose. Literature and art, and any of those kind of mediums, they bring out such emotion in people, for both the producers and the people consuming it, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We have a question here.
Those kids. I was one of those kids who
Mm,
sought comfort in the books that I read. So it's, you know, to end up being one of them, that's something.
it's great. It's fantastic. And look, we've got a question from Ben, age 10. How do you stay motivated to keep writing? I try to write books all the time, but I lose motivation.
Again, I think it's, you've got to choose something that's really interesting to you. That's the first step. And it's got to be something you really care about to write about. And it can't be just something casually funny that happened. And I think the way you can find out if it's deep enough for you to write about is to not write straight away. I think one of the mistakes people make is they have a really good idea and think, great, I'll sit down and write, because we who write or make art, we love doing it and we can't wait to do it. But I think waiting is actually important. I think, you know, keep it in your mind and just process it for a little while. Allow it to stay up there, because while it's in your head, it's gaining mass and it's gaining complexity and texture, and it's interacting with the world. So this idea you're carrying around just as an idea, because it's in the front of your mind, it's interacting with the world around you, so that if in a week or a month, or in my case 16 years later, you sit down to write that thing, there is a lot of stuff attached to that when you pull it out to write. So I would say, you know, especially the stuff you don't have to write for school with deadlines attached, take advantage of the fact that you don't have to start immediately, and just think about it for a while. Research it. And I don't mean go and look up research books to make sure it's all correct. I mean, read things that are similar, read about ideas that are connected to the idea that you're writing about, look at other people's books, read books that excite you, and all of that ends up getting into the piece of writing that you do.
Fantastic. And Ben can always write to you too, Isabelle, and ask you for your help, your opinions, your advice.
Can.
Wonderful. We've got J and G who are tuning in from Melbourne as well tonight.
Mel, my heart's with you down in Victoria. I feel I should be there in solidarity.
Absolutely, absolutely. They are curious about why you chose to write Obernewtyn in the first person, and if you ever found that restricting later down the track.
No, it's my favourite way to write, first person. Apparently it isn't the easiest way to write, but for some reason I've always found I liked, like this current story that I've written, I started out writing it in third person, and I couldn't get inside the character enough. And the minute I took, you know, I made it I found I was able to feel it much more vividly. So, I mean, there are difficulties with the first person, of course, because you can only know what the character you're writing from is thinking. But there is where fantasy comes, or science fiction comes into its own. Elspeth can only see what she can see, unless she has the power to look through the eyes of another character. She can only see the time she's in, unless she happens to be able to dream of the past and future. She can only know what she experiences, unless she can happen to get inside the minds of other people. So all those fantasy abilities, apart from being fun to play with, are also free me from the constraints of first person. So again, science fiction and fantasy can allow you can be very clever with how you go round writing your character. You can break the rules as long as you work it out well enough.
There you go, J and G. I hope that answers your question. Oh, goodness. Ben has got a lovely comment here. He loves your crow voice. You're one of his favourite authors, and he has a signed copy of Little Fur. So you've
Oh,
met
that's
him.
nice. Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad. Well, he's just increasing Crow's sense of entitlement. And, he will be bringing his protesting to have his own YouTube channel to do interviews, but he's incredibly rude sometimes. I'm not sure.
We've got a few people. Sorry, I've just got a few people here who have commented that they're listening to the series Obernewtyn and Dark Song on audiobooks, I should say. And how long does it actually take to record an audiobook, particularly with these big books?
The really big ones take between a week and 10 days. And a week and 10 days means you start at 7:30 in the morning in a studio where you can, within an hour, you can't breathe and it's really hot. And you stay there till lunchtime, you have a break and you go out into the sun blinking like an owl, and then you eat for half an hour, then you go back in till 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you read constantly. It's very, very, very tiring. I really like doing it. I like the interactions I have with my producers. I enjoy it, but it is really, really tiring. I have to go back to the room in the hotel at night and not speak to anybody because I'm trying to guard my voice from being used up. So, yeah.
Sounds like hard work.
It is hard work, but I really, really like it. I'm about to do, I will be doing soon The Velvet City, which is the final one in the Kingdom of the Lost series. And that's because, it won't be published in hard cover version, in paperback version, in any version until next year now. So I'm contemplating bringing it out as an audio book. So
yeah, awesome.
So I see Melissa's asking what I'd suggest as a good starting place. I would say Little Fur would be good, or perhaps The Red Wind, which is the first of that series with Beely and Jluti. Here they are, Beely and Jluti. I'd say that one would be good.
And they are obviously some of the inspiration behind those characters, Isobelle, those two toys there.
I found these in an op shop in Eastern Europe, and they were just in a throwaway bin together. And look at them, they're so cute. Who would throw them out? They've got little tails, and I loved them. And I picked them up and I thought, I'll give them to my little girl. She was only 3 back then. And as I was holding them, Babichka came striding in. She's this big, dramatic woman, and she plucked this one out of my hand and she said, that will be for Clara and this one will be for Adelka. The other way around. This was for Adelaide, my daughter, Adelka, and this was for Clara, her sophisticated 7-year-old cousin, who just pitched it up on a shelf. And it laid there, and it ached my heart that this poor little guy was, torn away from his brother. And one day I went there and it was on the ground and a dog had chewed off his paw. And I thought, that is abuse. So I traded the girl, Clara, 2 Selena Gomez tapes to get Beely back again, and I put them back together again. So there we are.
The things that we find inspiration in, isn't it? It's amazing sometimes.
Years. It was after the Little Fur series. We had them for 15 years before I started to think, after I'd finished the Little Fur series, I wanted to draw something else, and they were the obvious choice. So that's where those came from.
We've got a couple more questions. Isobelle, your activism around Australia's asylum seeker policy is truly inspiring. Do you think this is something that could ever inspire a book?
I think it would be, this kind of thing, I think you process it. I don't think I'd write about a refugee. I don't think, however, you process the pathos and the pain and the idea of people who are trapped and just being held for some political reason into writing. For instance, just these 2 little guys, they are actually refugees. They lose their home and they're seeking a new home elsewhere. They get into a lot of trouble as they pass over other people's territories. And that's a book for little children, and these words, refugees and homelessness, and none of these words appear. but at some deep level, I am processing those ideas. So it's impossible not to get involved in something like this and to hear some of those tragic stories and not somehow bring them into your writing as well. So I do see that they will be, if you look at Alison White Star, you know, it has at the centre of the book, it has a refuge, an asylum seeker refuge right in the centre of the book, long before I started standing in activism or anything like that. So it is something that concerns me, you know, again, power and powerlessness. To go back to those very early issues that motivated me as a thinker and a writer when I was just 14.
Yeah, awesome. And Alison White Star, another standalone book of yours that's just really great, basically, to sum it up. We've got a question here from Ray. He says, one for the librarian, perhaps. Oh, thank you. Isobelle, you probably have something to say about this too.
Oh, there's a lot of questions. I'm really touched by all of it. Oh, I see where it is. One for the librarians, teenagers. Oh, well, one of the things I was really interested in was the idea of, because I'd written the series over such a long time, I always thought that perhaps when it had such a following, I thought perhaps by accident I'd come upon a good strategy that would have been a great strategy if it had been one, which was that by writing it over such a long time and people rereading it, it deepened their connection to the series. So I kept them for longer. And I was always interested to find that when I finished the series, would anyone feel the same way who would just simply read from beginning to end? Would they have that same deep connection that long-time fans who had to wait have had? And I thought they wouldn't. I didn't think they would. But what I'm finding is that people who do read through it don't find that they don't see the gaps, they don't feel the gaps, and whether or not they're as deeply engaged, I don't know. That's how can we even tell that kind of thing? But it is something I'm curious about. When someone tells me they've started the series anew, I am curious really about how that, you know, whether that is the same experience. But I think I'll need some long sight before I can tell.
Yeah, it's difficult to kind of see people's reading patterns over a long time, I suppose, in that kind of regard. From my perspective, in Bathurst Library here, we obviously have the whole Obernewtyn series on our shelves, and in the past 4 years or so, I don't think we've ever had the complete series sitting on the shelves. There's always been someone there's always been someone cycling through the books and going through them, from what I've noticed. And you know, I have my books and my series that I keep an eye on because I feel so passionately about them. So I have noticed. Good question, Ray. Good question. I'm just going back through now to see if we have any questions that I've missed. But I think that might be it, Isobelle.
I am accused there of killing one of my characters. I won't say which character it is, Deb. And I know that for you personally, I think I know who Deb is, just simply because of that reaction. And I remember her writing to me as a fan and asking me something about this character. And I was able to answer in the positive, even though I knew something terrible was going to happen, feeling terribly guilty that, you know, I was going to sledgehammer her down the track. It's interesting to have an ongoing relationship, you know, with fans who've become friends and who I've become very close with over the years, who no longer think of me in that fan way because we've known one another for such a long period of time, and to see that they still feel those things for the books, you know, even though we've become friends. I have no glamour, but the books still retain their importance. So that's nice.
Yeah. And Isobelle, if we want to follow more closely what you're currently working on and currently doing, is your Facebook page the best page, or website?
I probably don't talk all that. I post a lot of stuff I'm interested in on Facebook I don't very often post about writing. I do it occasionally. I've only got so much time, and I put a lot of time into the writing that I do on my Patreon site now. I have a support site where people can go on and, you know, be patrons and whatnot. So I tend to post stuff there. And for people who don't want to do that, and I sometimes post that for public as well as for people who belong to the site. And also I have a website where sometimes stuff appears. I also have a site I really like, and I now will go back to now that I've finished my PhD, called the Slipstream, which is that's a site where I write long form essays and talk about writing and stuff like that too. So that's another place where you can find me as well. If you want to talk to me though, or ask me something in particular, Messenger on Facebook, you know, friend me and message me on Facebook. That's the best way to reach me, because I answer all my questions there.
Great, thank you so much for that. I know that a few people here is definitely going to take you up on it. And we have been recording tonight so that we can make this talk available later to people who weren't able to join us live. So I think we might wrap up. Thank you very, very much. It's been fantastic. We've had some fantastic comments and interaction on the Q&A. So thank you everyone at home as well.
Questions, really wonderful questions. Thank you. And thank you for letting me share my news with you.
It's very exciting. You've got a lot of support out there and a lot of people saying congrats. Well done.
Thank you.
All right. Now, so